Richard Rellis here with columnist Bob Robb, and an outside organization and this newspaper are fighting for records related to the state Senate ordered audit of the 2020 election. And Bob, you bring up that this raises some interesting questions about what lawmakers can keep private and what they have to disclose to the public.
That has surfaced in the context of these two lawsuits, which assert, and so far the assertion has been upheld by judges, that everything related to this audit between all the parties, including the inside parties and the outside parties, are subject to Arizona's public records law. But the legislature is asserting what it calls a legislative privilege to keep some of that information secret, despite finding by judges that the public records law applies. And when I looked into it, this legislative privilege has not a particularly sturdy antecedent. It's based upon common law principles going back to a fight between the Crown and the English Parliament in the 1600s. And it's much broader than the true immunity that the Arizona Constitution provides. And this case, I think, points out the need for the court to sort of spin back an excessive grant of legislative privilege that it has granted that far exceeds what the Constitution requires.
Yeah, as you point out, the state constitution is very narrow in what it says legislative immunity is, essentially applying only to what is said on the floor.
Only what is said in debate. Now, one could interpret that more broadly, and I wouldn't have a problem with that. But the immunity is only for liability from civil and criminal prosecution. Disclosure doesn't involve liability. It doesn't involve civil or criminal prosecution. So to me, it's clear that the explicit statutory law ought to trump this sort of ephemeral common law, but it has gotten strong support from the courts, and now you've got the two trial judges trying to wrestle with how to apply that in the circumstances before them. They both seem highly skeptical of the claims of legislative privilege, so I don't think it will prevail, but it may get bounced up, which would give the higher court an opportunity to reevaluate how broad they've made this privilege and how subjective it is and how difficult it is to apply the standard that the high court has set forth to particular circumstances, such as encountered in these two lawsuits.
Yeah, and part of it is also what debate is. Is there legislation being contemplated? Senator Karen Fann says this whole process began as an endeavor not to reverse the election, but to see if changes in legislation are needed. And you say that's another wrinkle, that maybe the legislature does have some merit to hold back records if it actually involved pending legislation.
That is what the current case law says. And I think in this particular circumstance, that goes too far. But the court has been inconsistent as to whether an investigation and communications related to that investigation are eligible for the legislative privilege. In other words, you can keep them secret. I think clearly the statutory provisions of the public records law trumps that in this case. But the court has held that this privilege sort of derives from the more narrow constitutional requirement. So it's unclear to the trial court judges, and they're trying to work their way through it. But under case law, well, the court has decided both ways. It's decided that an investigation is part of the legislative privilege, and in other cases, it has decided that it's not.
Right, from case law that you mentioned in the column that varies depending on whether we're talking about a more recent case involving J.D. Mesnard, the former Speaker of the House, or back to Sam Steiger in the 70s. And I guess all of this gets to, by definition, a cyber ninja should be cloaked in secrecy. We'll see if the courts change all of that with this.
That's an argument their lawyers haven't thought to make.